Hello to everybody, I'm Marco Beato. Welcome to a new episode of Understanding Sports Science. Today we will summarize the main findings of this paper, Resistant Training Variables for Optimization of Muscle Hypertrophy, which was published in Frontiers in 2022. If you like this presentation, please subscribe to this channel where you can find free sports science lessons. In this paper, we try to answer the following question. Can muscle hypertrophy adaptation be obtained through several resistant training programs? Is there a well-established consensus on how resistant training variables should be manipulated to optimize muscle growth? Let's start with a brief introduction. Hypertrophy is defined as an increase in muscle size, which can be achieved through exercise. Three main factors contribute to this physiological phenomenon: sarcoplasmatic hypertrophy, myofibrillar hypertrophy, and hyperplasia. In this regard, resistant training is considered the gold standard for increasing muscle mass, which is based on three key variables such as mechanical stress, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. Traditionally, resistant training focused on hypertrophy is characterized by moderate load, high total volume, and short rest periods, although the effect of resistant training program vary depend on the manipulation of its variables. From a human health standpoint, muscle mass plays a significant role in several actions of daily life as locomotion. So low level of muscle mass may lead to increased risk of several diseases. In this regard, resistant training and their associated hypertrophy adaptations have been shown to have health benefits such as reducing body fat, increasing metabolic rate, lowering blood pressure and cardiovascular demands on exercise, improving blood lipid profile, glucose tolerance, and insulin sensitivity, and so on. Previous research found that hypertrophy-oriented resistant program, for example, 3 sets at 10-12 repetitions using 70% of their 1RM in sarcopenic obese adult during 15 weeks, obtained improvements in functional capability and power, as well as a reduction in fat mass. On the other hand, other research observed significant improvements in glycemic control, insulin sensitivity, and triglycerides after the application of hypertrophy training program, for example, 2-3 sets for 8-10 repetitions using 60-80% of 1RM in adults with type 2 diabetes mellitus. For all these benefits, a comprehensive and controlled increase in muscle mass seems to be recommended for anyone, regardless of their age or fitness level. So we know that muscle hypertrophy adaptation can be obtained through several resistant training programs, and we know also the benefits of these resistant training programs and the benefits of hypertrophy. However, there is no well-established consensus on how resistant training variables should be manipulated to optimize muscle growth. So an umbrella review on this topic is necessary. In this slide is reported the umbrella review design using in this paper. The present umbrella review was carried out following a preferred reporting items for systematic review and meta-analysis, named as PRISMA Statement Guidelines. About the search strategy, for this research, the following databases were included: PubMed, Medline, SportDiscus, and Web of Science. Likewise, ResearchGate was used as a source of complementary information. The inclusion criteria for this review were only meta-analyses published in English were included. We did not consider other languages. The following inclusion criteria were applied: participants, male or female, healthy and physically active participants were included. Study focused on specific age population as children or elderly participants were excluded. Interventions: resistant training program with traditional instruments, for example, free weight, weight stack machine, were included. Comparison group, usual training, brackets, no additional training. Outcome measures: muscle mass, cross-sectional area, lean body mass, muscle thickness, fat-free mass, muscle fibers, and muscle volume were all included in this umbrella review. About the methodological quality analysis, the methodological quality of the included meta-analysis was assessed through an Napster 2 checklist, which is considered a reliable and valid tool to evaluate the risk of bias. Instead, the quality of the evidence evaluation was assessed by a grade scale. However, because of the complexity of this scale and the duration of this presentation, I have not reported in this presentation the results. However, you can find them in the paper published that I suggest to read. In this figure, you can see the flow diagram of the meta-analysis retrieval process followed in this umbrella review. The initial search identified 55 meta-analyses, while 2 additional meta-analyses were found through a secondary search. Subsequently, 25 duplicate records were removed, and 13 meta-analyses were excluded based on their title or their abstract. 19 meta-analyses were read in more detail, downloaded the full text, and 14 meta-analyses were included in the umbrella review at the end of this process. Based on the study analyzed, we can say that volume, frequency, intensity, contraction type, repetition duration, and the application of the restriction of blood flow can generate hypertrophy adaptation in healthy subjects. Conversely, other variables such as exercise order, time of the day, and type of periodization appear not to directly influence the magnitude of muscle mass gains. However, further research is necessary to clarify their capability to stimulate hypertrophy. Now we can move to the discussion of the main findings of this paper. About sets, volume is commonly defined as the total amount of work performed and can be expressed as the total number of sets repetition per exercise, or the total number of repetitions multiplied by the amount of weight used in an exercise. Based on the results of this review, it seems exists a dose-response relationship between volume and hypertrophy. However, recent research reported that significantly difference in muscle mass gains were found when 2-3 sets compared to 1 set were performed, while no difference were observed when comparing volume of 2-3 sets versus 4-6 sets. Therefore, further research is needed on this topic. About frequency, closely related to volume, frequency appeared to be a key variable for hypertrophy gains, which refer to a number of resistance training sessions performed or the number of times a specific muscle group is trained in a given period of time, for example, a week. About intensity, this variable is considered one of those with the greatest effect on hypertrophy responses. In this regard, each percentage of 1 RM is related to a certain number of maximum repetitions to be performed, traditionally categorized into ranges. For example, low range, minus 30%, for example, a number of repetitions higher than 20, a moderate range between 30 and 70% of the 1 RM, 11, 12 to 20 reps, and a high range where the intensity is higher than 70% of the 1 RM, and the number of reps is generally lower than 12 or 11. As reported in this paper, traditionally, training using high loads with a moderate number of repetitions, for example, 80% 1 RM, 8-10 reps, has been considered as a key strategy to optimize the muscle gains. Contraction type. Based on what reported in this umbrella review, the eccentric contraction promotes greater gains in muscle mass compared to concentric contraction, based on the idea that the mechanical stress placed on the eccentrically contracting muscle triggers a progressive activation of genes responsible for cellular growth and development, which is not possible by concentric or isometric action. However, the comparison between adaptation on hypertrophy caused by concentric and eccentric contractions have been limited by the difficulty of isolating them from human movements, which imply a cyclical repetition of both types of contraction. Additionally, previous research observed that concentric contraction induced hypertrophy gains in the middle portion of the muscle, while eccentric contraction have a greater effect on the distal portion, possibly due to the localized muscle damage along the fiber produced by non-uniform muscle activation of eccentric contractions. What about repetition duration? Training with a load lower than 80-85% of 1 RM allows the trainee to voluntarily modify the tempo of the lift. In this way, it is possible to reduce the velocity of the lift by increasing the mechanical tension of the muscle. This allows to promote greater hypertrophy responses. What about blood flow restriction? This method is based on the decreased blood flow to a muscle by application of an external constricting device, such as a blood pressure cuff or a tourniquet, to provide mechanical compression of the underlying vasculature. In this slide, you can find training variables that don't have strong supporting evidence for their use. However, this doesn't mean that it cannot be beneficial for some subjects. The first one is exercise order. Multi-joint exercises are those that recruit one or more large muscle groups involving two or more main joints, while single-joint exercises are those that involve small muscle groups involving in single main joints. It is not clear if the order actually matters for hypertrophic purposes. Specifically, multi-joint exercise can generate a significant stabilization of the body, involving numerous muscles that could not be stimulated by single-joint movements. However, single-joint exercises are necessary to achieve a better length-tension relationship and a greater electromyography activity that is related to a greater motor units recruitment. A second point is the time of the day when you can have the training. The time of the day in which maximum performance is reached is called acrophase. Previous research concluded that hypertrophic adaptation were similar regardless of the time of the day the training sessions were located. You can find more information in this paper, but overall, these results suggest that the time of the day for strength and hypertrophic purposes should be based on personal preferences. About periodization, we know that there are two different models. One is a linear periodization model, and the second one is called non-linear or ondulated model. Based on the evidence that we have and based on the meta-analysis report in this umbrella review, when the overall training volume is used, no significant difference were observed. Therefore, we cannot conclude that one periodization model is superior to the other. Let's move to the practical application now. Volume. Research has reported a great dose-response relationship between resistance training weekly volume and muscle growth. Therefore, it will be recommended to prescribe 2-3 sets per exercise, covering at least 10 weekly sets for each muscle group, while greater weekly volume doesn't seem to offer additional hypertrophy benefits. About frequency, although the modification of this variable doesn't directly influence hypertrophy gains, significant effect favoring higher frequency was observed when volume was not equal. Therefore, training frequency can be used as a tool to modify the overall weekly training volume. About intensity, the choice of light or heavy loads can be made depending on the characteristics of the subject. It is appropriate to prescribe variation in the magnitude of the load. Light load, minor 60%, heavy load, higher than 60% of the 1 RM. However, higher load seem to offer greater adaptations. About contraction type, it seems appropriate to combine both concentric and eccentric contraction to optimize hypertrophy responses. However, it seems that eccentric contraction may offer some additional advantages compared to the concentric one. About repetition duration, a wide range of repetition duration seem to be appropriate to stimulate hypertrophy adaptation, such as 0.58 seconds, this type of range. However, longer duration seem to be counterproductive. The last point is about blood flow restriction. It seems appropriate to use this technique in experienced subjects or in those who cannot use heavy load, for example, injury athletes. We are near the conclusion of this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I take the opportunity to thank the other authors of this paper, Roberto, Javier, and Daniel, for the great job done with it and for this great publication. So finally, I thank you everybody for listening to this episode of Understanding Sports Science. If you are interested in this type of sports science lesson and you want to support open science, please subscribe to this channel. See you in the next episode.